So, the first substantive agenda item is around mental health. This is under the sort of category of supporting victims and witnesses. And obviously mental health is a priority, or addressing mental health within the police and crime plan, particularly working with our partners in the health service and the community and voluntary sector. We have made good progress in establishing the Mental Health and Justice Forum, with a particular emphasis recently on the changes to the legislation around the Section 136 and places of safety. Also, the liaison and diversion schemes, which are funded by NHS, initially started in the Wakefield district, rolled out to Leeds, and due to be launched in Bradford soon as well, followed by I think Kirklees later in the year. And we've also recently discussed the suicide prevention strategy with partners at that meeting as well. So with that sort of preamble on this agenda item, I'll now hand over to you to talk to the report that you've provided. Thanks.
Okay, so by way of introduction, Commissioner, and just in case we've got any new viewers, what we are now doing is giving you a quarterly update, a 6-monthly update on each of our specific priority areas. So prior to this particular report, you got a very, very comprehensive report about all of the things that we had done and were doing. And the intention now moving forwards is to give you a regular update about all the things that have happened, and then some of the ideas about things that we're going to be moving towards. And as you say, some of the legislation has placed some changes on us. Catherine Hankinson would normally be the ACC reporting on this particular matter, but she's currently on leave, so Andy has very willingly stepped in and will go through some detail for you.
Okay, thank you.
So obviously this is a follow-up report from the previous one, and since that time there has been significant new mental health legislation that's become statute. This report outlines some of the changes and also provides insights on the work that's being done to better provide for people with ongoing mental health issues. As we hope, the Police and Crime Act made several changes to the Mental Health Act of 1983, and it's been a real positive driver in this area. That new legislation makes it necessary for police officers to consult with a mental health practitioner before detaining someone under the Mental Health Act, and also rules out the use of police cells for children specifically, and only under very exceptional circumstances for the detention of an adult in police cells. So the report outlines some statistics. You'll see that it compares December 16 with December 17, but given that December 17 appears to be an exceptionally low month, we've also included November 17, which gives a better comparator, which does demonstrate that in the main it's relatively static, with the exception of Leeds that's seen a fairly significant reduction in the number of 136 detentions. So just by way of example, Leeds has gone down from 90 to 54. Bradford pretty static, 11 to 18. Kirklees 13 to 11. Wakefield 11 to 12, and Calderdale 10 to 9, which demonstrates a fairly static picture. But we are still investigating the reasons why December was so low. Could be it's just simply positive news around 136 detentions. So just in relation to some of the process issues, since the new legislation, which came into act on the 11th of December 2017, no one has been detained under 136 has been brought into police custody. So that's obviously good news in relation to the new legislation. And what we're also seeing is the handover to health professionals at the Section 136 suites is being done in a timely manner. There still, however, does remain some delays around people that are taken to emergency departments. The legislation also brings in a new, or it makes it now lawful to arrest someone under Section 136 within a police station, which it previously didn't. So that provides, in effect, two forms of arrest for police officers. One is where someone's arrested for a criminal offence and becomes ill whilst in custody, and we are able to then arrest under 136 and transport to a health-based place of safety. Or if during investigation someone receives a formal mental health assessment whilst in custody, and needs admission to a based place of safety and one's not available or one's not immediately available, we can detain within the police station until that time that a specialist bed can be found. But again, we are too early into the legislation to understand the impact of that for us, given that we've had no 136 arrests and people brought to police stations as yet. But what we have got is an escalation process, so that where we do have a mental health crisis, particularly around issues in relating to finding beds for individuals, we are able to escalate that to senior officers within the healthcare trusts. And so, although it's still really limited, the feedback is that escalation policy is effective and allows us to have meaningful discussions with our counterparts in health. So just in terms of ongoing work and developments, we've established weekly partnership conferences to ensure that we've properly embedded the new legislation, where our districts work with their partners just to talk through any issues around timeliness of ambulance, etc. We are doing some work around high intensity users. We are trying to identify the sort of top 10 most complex cases within each district, so we can do problem solving work around that and look at how we can get better pathways to support, so that police custody is not the natural path for that one. And we're also looking at improved data collection. The new handheld device we've got, the digital police pocket notebook, that now enables us to record mental health incidents, and officer completion rates are good. I'll be talking about the handheld devices later in the meeting, Commissioner. So that's providing us with better quality data as well to understand. Just in terms of equality, diversity and human rights issues, it still remains unlawful for officers to arrest someone under Section 136 whilst in a dwelling. That in itself can pose significant challenges to police officers who are called to people's home addresses whilst they're suffering a mental health episode. And officers are often faced with making very difficult decisions about how to best deal with the best interests of the people in order to protect life and safeguard them. Clearly any arrest would be a breach of their human rights. So we are working with national mental health leads who are aware of that problem, and informing the sort of ongoing debate around that, but there is no power to arrest for 136 at home. An officer having to work around that in the best interests of the members of the public. Just in terms of strategic risks, clearly there's compliance with the legislation. Our feedback is through monitoring that's good. Majority of officers are not only acting correctly, but actually displaying real bravery and excellent safeguarding skills as we see that. And of course our use of body-worn video enables us to review incidents. I think previous concerns about potential non-compliance with the new legislation is unfounded. It is what we found from the dip sampling. One of the strategic risks around this is use of ambulance. We have the facility to request ambulance for transportation for people suffering mental health episodes. What we're seeing is that's a low take-up rate, and part of that is around delays in receiving ambulances. I think what we're assessing is the other element is that officers are determining exactly can't wait, so they're just transporting straight away. So that's part of our ongoing checks and reviews and balances and the work that we take forward with the partnerships to understand that better. We are also including within the training that's rolling out in the next 12 months, the mental health training, the use of ambulance, because that is covered as part of that training package, so that officers are aware that they can call for an ambulance under the protocols. And finally, just the demand implications of mental health. It is significant for us in terms of the implications. We've got an ongoing exercise around mapping so that we can understand what the demand is in all the districts, which will help us analyse our most complex cases, and that will help us to understand and develop better partnership approaches to people with mental health cases to work through with our partners.
I think there's a couple of things that I would add. Probably post the report being written, I'm obviously going out at the moment and doing a series of Meet the Chiefs and meeting groups of staff, particularly in some of the outer lying areas of the force. And two areas that I think are risks that we need to think through are very encouraging signs around mental health per se, more complex when somebody who has had a mental health episode and is also either experiencing the effects of drink or drugs. And how do we separate out those assessments? And at the moment, I think there's a conversation to be had around which takes primacy. The second issue is, whilst it's really great that people aren't coming into custody, it's also got a downside because we are then left with the individual suffering potential issues. And of course, all of my officers, generally speaking, are first aid trained only and will be aware of the signs and symptoms, but not necessarily how to deal with somebody who's suffering a serious episode. And what that means is they are either transporting them to hospital or that place of safety and waiting for that place to become available, whereas previously they would have been able to put them into a secure place within a custody suite and then resume duties. So it is actually having an unintended consequence in terms of tying up units sometimes. So we just need to be cognizant of that and continue those conversations. And it is very early days yet.
Yeah, no, thanks for that. And as I sort of said at the outset in relation to the last mental health and justice forum that we had where ACC Hankinson attended, this was immediately before the legislation came in. So it's really pleasing that all these mechanisms have been put in place and the joint working and the protocols. One of the things that was mentioned in relation to ambulances was whether other vehicles might be made available, either from the ambulance, well, probably from the ambulance service, that are not strictly an ambulance in the conventional sense, but is a vehicle that's made available as a sort of triaging type process. So I don't know if that's been looked at within some of these cases where it might not need the fully fledged ambulance to arrive on scene.
I'm not sure whether I can only assume. I know Darren Minton, our detective superintendent who leads the safeguarding governance unit, has a sort of strategic meeting with health partners around these issues, and certainly the monitoring, the weekly audits we do picks up on ambulance attendance, ambulance availability, and that is being fed into that process. But whether it's specifically talking about vehicles, but I'll feed that into it to ensure it's part of the discussion.
Okay, thanks. I mean, obviously, it is pleasing that since the legislation came in on the 11th of December, according to the figures we have so far, there hasn't been any Section 136s in custody, which is a credit to everybody concerned in the way this is working so far. Clearly, Dee, you've just started to sort of outline what you see as possibly some of the risks in maintaining that position over the coming months.
Yeah, I think, as I say, it's early days, but we're already starting to get some feedback to say if it is purely an individual who's suffering from a mental health condition and needs our support, that can be relatively straightforward, and we've got really good relationships to be able to manage that outside of the police custody area. It gets more complicated if somebody has taken either drugs or is suffering the effects of alcohol, because as it's been briefed into me, we have to await the effects of the alcohol or the drugs to wear off before the full mental health assessment can be undertaken. And that then places us sometimes in a difficult space, because how do I then release the officers from dealing with the individual in order to be able to undertake other duties? And so there's some further conversations to be had, I think, about how we can best manage individuals who've got even more complex needs.
Yeah, I mean, I accept that it's quite early, well, it is early days so far, but I know, Jen, you want to just mention about the figures.
Yeah. Just going back to the low figures that you took us through, Andy, do you think that the significant reduction that we've seen in detentions under Section 136 are in any way to do with officer reluctance, given that it's new legislation and we have got these complications that Dee mentioned?
If I'm honest, I don't think so. I think officers are acutely aware of their responsibilities around mental health and safeguarding people. I think the fact that they speak to a mental health practitioner before considering arrest is helpful, because we're not trained and we're not experts in this field, so we can take specialist advice from a mental health practitioner to understand whether or not it requires detention and further support, or whether actually this is something that is quite sort of within the boundaries of normality for an individual.
I think it would be fair to say, and you would expect me to say this, we rely very heavily on the medical expertise of the people that we're liaising with. And, very regularly they will say, we think that individual will be perfectly safe in their own home. And of course, they have the degree of medical expertise that we don't. And of course, all that needs to be taken into consideration when you're doing that risk assessment.
And as you said in the report, so on the face of it, the December 17 figures do seem
Mm.
unusually low, and you are carrying out some work into looking at
Yeah,
that.
I mean, bearing in mind the legislation came in on the 17th, I think it was the
Yeah.
17th of December, so it's
Right.
a partial month.
Yeah,
I think the January figures will really sort of cement where the new trend will be in this for us.
okay, thanks for that. So, central government have provided some additional funding for health-based places of safety, but unfortunately hasn't matched that with any revenue funding. Could you say what challenges you think that creates for the police, and are the health-based places of safety of a consistent standard across West Yorkshire, especially for children and young people under 18?
Well, we've currently got good access to health-based places of safety for both children and adults across all districts. The quality of them varies significantly. It's welcomed for us that some trusts are seeking to improve the sort of physical safety in the environment within their suites, and some have applied for the capital funding. The wider issue, I think, really is that the specialist beds for children are small in number, and so should we have a child admitted to a mental health hospital, it's likely that they are transported some distance, and that's a significant risk for us, is the sort of quality and the absolute availability.
Yeah. I think you've confirmed what my fears were around some of this, and I'll be certainly working with you and our colleagues through the Mental Health Forum to try and get some more consistency around this, because now the legislation is in place, you know, there's no reason why this shouldn't be addressed in a more, in my view, systematic way, and not depending on which postcode you happen to live in West Yorkshire.
I'm sure it's going to be something that the
Yep.
Care Quality Commission will look into as an inspectorate process.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that. I also note in the report a mention of the Big Lottery funded West Yorkshire Finding Independence programme, which is a consortium of voluntary organisations supporting people with complex needs. Again, I understand that this funding finishes in 2020, and could you just sort of outline what risks that may bring?
Well, clearly there are risks for us should that funding cease. The Independence Programme have commissioned some analysis through academic work at Sheffield Hallam University to understand the impact of their work, and what that does show initially is that where people engage with the Independence Programme, there are significant reductions in calls to policing for those users. What we're seeing is overall the criminal justice system is shown to benefit considerably from the direct work of the navigators, and should that funding cease, there'll be significant risks around calls for service, potential crime and social behaviour, and obviously the need for problem solving at neighbourhood policing level and safeguarding level for us. So it's, you know, we'd be very supportive of that continuing,
Yeah.
because we do see direct benefits, not just for us but obviously for the individuals themselves.
Yeah, thanks for that. And again, I think collectively that's something we can sort of make representations on regarding the potential impact of the cessation of that particular funding stream and the, like I said, the positive impact that it's having.
I think we're really pleased that there's academic rigour behind the evaluation, because that will give us some pretty compelling evidence around the benefits of that work.
Yeah, but when you have a distressed individual who's ringing us between 40 and 50 times a day, you know, that's a significant amount of time, and that individual is ringing us seeking support or help or something, which of course then means that other callers can't get through.
I think my last question is around what scope is there for the police to support the development of better prevention and early intervention strategies around mental health to try and avoid the need to deal with crisis situations, accepting that it's, you know, clearly mainly a health sort of intervention, but nevertheless, we know that officers are confronted with these situations on a pretty daily basis.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of scope actually for us in this area. The indicators show us that our existing problem solving is not effective enough. We know that we need to work more closely with partners, but there are some opportunities that pop out of this around early help and how we identify and respond to a neighbourhood policing team level and a problem solver level, and the development of our neighbourhood policing offer will help us around the specific training we can give in that area. The district mental health problem solving meetings that I mentioned to earlier are really helpful for us to identify and set mental health care plans for the most vulnerable and most complex users. And so they're developing and maintaining specialist services and dedicated resources that focus on the person, such as the Wi-Fi programme or the high intensity network that we've got, are all areas for us to continue to support and exploit. As I mentioned earlier, currently we've asked each of the districts to identify their top 10 sort of complex users, so we can start to understand the drivers for their complex needs, and then better problem solve with partners, how we reduce that demand and how we can provide better service to help them live a more fulfilling life without the requirement to constantly be in touch with policing.
Yeah, thank you.
I think there's a lot we can do around trying to explore the options around better information sharing as well. It's very difficult, isn't it, when the health service, for understandable reasons, have a real concern about sharing any medical information. But it would be far, far better for any of my officers or staff attending an incident if they were more aware of the fact that the occupant of the house may be somebody who is in urgent need, or indeed any need, of mental health consideration, in a way that perhaps at the moment we don't.
I think we've agreed to fund some work, haven't we, around data sharing, stroke mapping.
We have indeed, and we'll feed that very point into the work that gets taken forward. Yeah.
Okay, anything else from you, Jane, on that one? No. Okay, thanks so much for that report. Thank you.